shocking revelations about the incoming Thunderstrike known as Arc Week, as well as a massive look into the update we'll be getting on April 9th. What's going on, Guardians? My name is The Black Link, and in this week's issue of the Bungie Weekly Blog, This Week at Bungie for Thursday, April 4th, 2019, this one is going to be chock full of changes dropping next week on April 9th with Update 2.2.1. We're going to learn about a lot of stuff in this week's TWAB. There are plenty of patch notes to go over, so let's just go ahead and jump on into things. First things first, we get to learn exactly what Arc Week is all about. Here's what Cosmo had to say. A storm is brewing. Next week, we'll kick off what we've been calling Arc Week. Our goal for this happening has been to take the element that makes our sandbox crackle and put it under the microscope. The most noticeable update is that we improved many Arc subclass paths from the time before Forsaken. The week will also feature Arc Singe and Arc Bounties to synergize with your updated abilities. To provide a proving grounds for all this new energy, Mayhem will be available in the Crucible to let you experiment with your enhanced Arc abilities using shockingly short cooldowns. Arc Week will also feature one of the most powerful Arc weapons ever created, the Thunderlord exotic machine gun. If you weren't able to complete the quest to obtain Thunderlord last year, you will have from April 9th to April 23rd to revisit the Cosmodrome and add it to your collection. So there we go, we've finally gotten an explanation for what exactly Arc Week is going to be, and I have to admit, it's actually way more than what I was expecting. I was just expecting Arc tiered bounties or something like that, with a bunch of Arc Singe modifiers added to basically every activity that could take them. And what we're getting is actually going to be huge changes to some Arc subclasses, as well as the return of the mighty Thunderlord. I was not expecting that. Last year, of course, when the Thunderlord quest went live, right before Black Armory came out, you had a very limited time to take part in what is an amazing quest that is filled with nostalgia and will take you back to your roots in Destiny 1. After that quest went away, Bungie mentioned that you would be able to get the Thunderlord in other ways in the future, and it looks like we now know what those ways are. If you missed out on that quest before, you're going to have your opportunity to get it once next week rolls around. And I hope all you Guardians out there who missed out on this amazing heavy machine gun the first time around, I hope you get a chance to grab it this time. It is definitely a weapon that's worth your time. But alright, let's move on a bit because we've got actually a lot of changes to talk about that'll be going into effect on April 9th. Like they said at the beginning there, a lot of the pre-Forsaken Arc subclasses like the Striker Code of the Juggernaut, the Hunter's Arc Strider, and the Warlock Stormcaller are going to be seeing some pretty big changes. So let's go ahead and dive on into them. First up, for the Striker Code of the Juggernaut, this is the bottom path for Striker. The Frontal Assault ability is seeing some changes. It now increases all weapon damage for the duration of the buff. For those who don't know, with Frontal Assault, you strike an enemy with this melee ability to reload your weapon and increase your weapon stability. This is a buff that generally lasts for about 10 seconds. And is now getting a generic weapon damage buff. It's going to be plus 25% against enemy combatants and plus 20% against enemy players. That's huge. The duration has also been increased from 10 seconds to 16 seconds, and finally the buff timer is now displayed on the HUD. That's a huge change to the Frontal Assault ability. And believe me, we're only just getting started here. Next up we have the ability Knockout. With Knockout, critically wounding an enemy or breaking their shield increases your melee range and damage. And when Update 2.2.1 goes live, this is seeing some buffs as well. That melee damage bonus has been increased from 25% to 60%. The ability now also triggers once you have dealt 60% damage to a target. Any damage done after 60% will refresh the timer. This still also triggers off of shield pops. Finally, the buff is no longer consumed after one melee attack, and the duration has increased from 3 seconds to 5 seconds. Again, another massive change for you Striker Titans out there. The increase in damage alone is a massive one. But being able to refresh that timer by dealing an additional 60% damage to other enemies while you've already got that bonus range and damage, this is going to be a pretty heavy hitting ability in both PvE and especially in PvP. You're going to have to be really careful if you're swapping hands with a Titan moving forward. Next up, we've got some changes coming to the Arc Strider Way of the Warrior path. This is the top path on that subclass tree. First up, there are changes coming to the Combination Blow ability. Generally speaking, killing an enemy with this ability triggers health regeneration and increases your melee damage temporarily. It's a buff that currently lasts about 20 seconds, and it's seeing some pretty big changes as well. First up, the bonus melee damage can now be stacked 3 times, which is going to require a melee ability for each stack. This buff increases the melee damage by 60% per stack in PvE, while increasing the damage by 22.7% per stack in PvP. Meaning in PvE, stacking this can grant you a maximum total of a 180% damage increase for melees. While getting a triple stack of this in PvP, which will be much more difficult I'd imagine, will get you around a 68.1% increase in damage. Both of which are absolutely massive changes. For comparison, this ability used to be 1 stack and increased melee damage by about 50%, so a very big buff for this. Finally, kills with this ability now heal 40 health in addition to starting health regen. So you're going to get an immediate 40 health, and it's going to start your health regen from that point on. Very powerful changes for combination blow. Next up, we've got Deadly Reach. With this ability, dodging increases your melee range, allowing you to lunge further to strike enemies. And with update 2.2.1, they've increased the buff duration from 6 seconds to 8 seconds, and the buff is no longer consumed by a melee hit, so you can dodge and then just take advantage of a bunch of different melees until that timer runs out. Which is of course going to pair perfectly with the combination blow ability. Really strong changes for the Way of the Warrior. Next up, we've got the Arcstrider's Way of the Winds, the bottom path tree. First up for Disorienting Blow. With this ability, you can strike an enemy with a melee attack to disorient the target and nearby enemies. And this ability is going to be seeing an increase to its disorient distance by 50% and increased duration of disorient on players from 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds. That's a massive change for PvP. 2 seconds is an absolute eternity in the Crucible. It's more than enough time to gap close, to zip around a corner, to whip out a shotgun. If you're able to land that disorienting blow on players, you basically just got yourself a free kill. Well, as long as you're paying attention. Next up, we've got Focused Breathing, where sprinting recharges your dodge ability. It also increases your maximum sprint speed. This ability is getting a buff that increases the dodge recharge bonus while sprinting by 100%, basically doubling it. Finally, we've got Combat Meditation. With this ability, when you're critically wounded, melee and grenade abilities recharge drastically faster. And moving forward, they've increased both the grenade and melee regeneration by 25% when this ability is active. Finally, for the Arcstrider, we've got Lightning Reflexes. This ability simply makes you harder to kill while dodging. And when update 2.2.1 comes out, it's going to be gaining increased damage resistance while dodging from 25% to 40% in PvP, and an increase from 63% damage resistance to 70% damage resistance in PvE. Huge defensive buffs there. And those are all the changes coming to the Arcstrider class. Some very powerful stuff there. But this next one is the one, of course, I'm really excited about. We've got some big changes coming to the Warlock class. And not just the Arc ones, may I say. But that's where we'll start things out. For Stormcallers, for the top and bottom path, your damage in Storm Trance is now going to scale up to 150% over 5 seconds of continuous use of the attack. Basically, your Emperor Palpatine Shocky Fingers are going to be getting even stronger when this update comes out. They've also updated the special effects and audio to support this functionality. Hopefully you'll look like a real lightning storm when you're dropping electricity on enemies. Then for more specific changes to the Attunement of Conduction, which is the top path, the ability Chain Lightning seeing some changes. This electrocuting melee ability hits at extended range and chains lightning from the struck target to nearby enemies. And with this update's buff, it can now chain up to 5 times. Up from being able to chain from 1 enemy, and each individual target can now be hit twice. Major change to the Chain Lightning ability. But going along with that, the chain damage has been decreased from 50 to 31 damage per chain hit. And I'd imagine that change was done so that this ability wouldn't be busted. Could you imagine getting up to 5 chains between enemies in PvP of 50 damage? Where individual targets can be hit twice? That'd be a little on the strong side. But next up, we've got changes coming to Arc Web. With Arc Web, enemies damaged by your grenades chain deadly lightning to nearby enemies. And in 2.2.1, this ability can now chain to many, many more targets, and back and forth between those targets. The amount of chaining varies based on use. And apparently Bungie's going to leave the testing for that up to us to discover. They've also increased the chain range from 10 meters to 12 meters. And now chaining arc damage will reduce the overall cooldown of your grenade. This works with arc web chains and chains from the chain lightning melee. You can earn 3% energy per instance of chain damage in PvE, while in PvP you can earn 10% energy per instance for chaining damage, meaning there's now going to be a symbiotic relationship between your Shocky melee attack and your grenades. Activating this arc web ability with either one of those will give you more grenade energy. Fantastic change. Definitely loving this stuff. Moving on to the attunement of the elements. This is the bottom tree path for the Stormcaller. First up, Electrostatic Surge is seeing a change. With this ability, your rift charges faster when allies are near you. And its changes are this. They've increased bonus regeneration rate of the rift by 600% per nearby friendly guardian. What? Okay, they say that this sounds insane and it's a big boost you'll definitely feel, but it was previously very low. I can agree, Electrostatic Surge was very low beforehand. You kind of noticed it when a lot of your teammates were nearby, but it wasn't enough to really make a difference. But 600% per nearby friendly guardian? That means if you're butt hugging in PvP, there should never be a time where you don't have your rift. But moving on, they've also extended the rift's duration from 15 seconds to 20 seconds, and they've added a UI notification for when the buff is active. If you are a team player in PvE or PvP and you love dropping your rifts for nearby teammates, this is a change that's made for you. Stick by your teammates, team shot some stuff, and you should always have your ability energy up. And, of course, that ties in perfectly with the next ability, Arc Soul. And of course, with the Arc Soul, your Rift now grants you or any ally that uses it an Arc Soul to use in battle. It's like a little mini turret that kind of follows you around and shoots at whatever you're looking at. It's actually a brand new Warlock exotic, the Getaway Artist, that work perfectly in tandem with the Arc Soul. You basically get to charge your grenade and turn it into a super powerful version of the Arc Soul. Well, it's getting a buff too. They've extended its duration by 50%. And with the changes made to Electrostatic Surge here, I could see mixing that with the Getaway Artist, creating all kinds of hectic combinations in PvE and PvP. Very happy to hear these changes, and I cannot wait to get my hands on this class when Tuesday rolls around. But there might be one other subclass I'll be playing a little bit more. And that, my friends, is of course, the Voidwalker Nova Warp setup. That's right, Guardians, we're finally learning about some buffs coming to this previous Titan of Terror in PvP. Here's the changes that they're going to make. First off, they give us a nice little note here. Clearly, we swung a bit hard when we hit this previously. This should serve as a nice middle ground to settle into. And these are the buffs that are coming to Nova Warp. First off, they've reduced the initial charge detonation energy cost by 20%. They've also reduced the energy cost of holding the charge detonation by 7%. They've reduced the time required to fully charge the charge detonation from 0.9 seconds to 0.7 seconds. Next up, they've reduced the dark blink cost by 20%. Really happy to see that change right there. You used up far too much energy gap closing with Nova Warp before. And finally, they've increased the base super duration from 18 seconds to 22 seconds, meaning you're going to have more time in Nova Warp. It's going to cost less for you to charge your detonations, it's going to cost less for you to blink around the battlefield, and the time it takes for you to charge up those nukes is going to be even shorter. All very good, very necessary changes in my opinion. And no, I'm not biased at all. And you can tell that by my incoming reaction to the final bit of subclass changes we're going to be talking about in this video, Dawnblade. Oh no, Dawnblade is getting a bit of a hit. Unfortunately for my fiery Warlock friends out there, the Everlasting Fire perk is going to be seeing a change. This is a perk tied to the Attunement of Flame. Killing an enemy with Daybreak increases its duration. Basically, as you're getting kills with Daybreak, your super is just going to keep going back up. If you've ever noticed the Dawnblade super lasting a long time in PvP, it's because that Warlock keeps getting kills. And unfortunately, it's going to be seeing a bit of a change moving forward. Bungie notes that similar to the Striker, they wanted to make sure this perk didn't allow for infinite supers in certain activities. We've increased the amount you get back up front, but put diminishing returns on it so you can't go forever. This will still be a super you can extend much longer with skill. They've tuned the amount of super gained from the Everlasting Fire perk. The initial return has been increased from 10% to 13% super energy, and then the returns will decay linearly over the course of 30 kills from 13% to 0.75% return per kill. Basically, so you won't have infinite super in certain activities. And Guardians, I can almost guarantee you this was a change made specifically for the Reckoning. Right now, the Reckoning is an activity that just throws endless enemies at you, especially once you get to either the bridge or the final sections in Reckoning Tier 2 and Tier 3. And I can definitely tell you from experience, once you get to that bridge section, you can basically keep your Dawnblade up ad infinitum. There's so many enemies coming all over the place, you can just sit there and continue throwing swords out and get maxed out super energy. And I feel like this particular change, this nerf to Everlasting Fire, is specifically to stop that. Even though it kind of doesn't really make too much sense. The bridge section of the Reckoning is a super rush anyway. Heck, most of the Reckoning is a super rush. But I don't know, I really get the feeling that this is probably a change that was directed specifically towards that game mode. But alright Guardians, that is pretty much it for the subclass tree changes. But what's that I hear you saying? What about Spectral Blades? Did they really say nothing about that? Well, they do bring it up in passing here, by basically saying they're working on it. They know how strong Spectral Blades are, and they're trying to figure out what they can tweak without breaking the class. And of course that they'll let us know the greater details once they finish playtesting with it. So don't worry, it sounds like those crazy, pesky Spectral Blade kids will be brought in line before too long. For now, just enjoy the purple. But alright Guardians, that is pretty much it for the subclass tree changes, but it's nowhere near the end of the stuff we learned about in this week's TWAB. Next up, we're going to be talking about some exotic catalysts. That's right, as a part of Arc Week and Update 2.2.1, several exotic catalysts are going to be made available. These 4 new exotic weapon catalysts are going to be available to drop in Nightfalls, Strikes, and in the Crucible. These catalysts are the Prospector, the Rat King, Hardlight, and the Suros Regime. Now, the Prospector, Rat King, and Hardlight can all drop from either Strikes or the Nightfall, but the Suros Regime catalyst is going to drop from the Crucible. So if you're somebody who's been waiting maybe 6 or 7 months to get some of those exotic catalysts that we've known have been in the game for a long time, we finally know exactly when and how we're going to be able to get our hands on these things. And it all starts next week. Alright, and moving on, there are several other quality of life changes that are going to be coming alongside Update 2.2.1. But we're going to cover just a few more of the biggest ones that they talk about here. First things first, Gambit Prime weapons. Moving forward, most Gambit Prime weapons will now have a chance to drop as a match completion reward from Gambit Prime. They're also increasing the drop rate for these weapons from the Reckoning activity. This is the stuff you can get from Tier 2 and Tier 3 as a random drop from the final bosses. Both Gambit Prime and the Reckoning will have increased drop rates for weapons after each completion without a drop until players are guaranteed a reward, very similar to the escalation protocol system right now, where if you keep completing the Reckoning over and over again without getting a drop, your chances at getting a drop are going to steadily increase until you get one, then they'll reset. So if you're somebody out there who's trying to farm for the shotguns, have hope, your chance will be coming soon. Additionally, there's some pretty big changes coming to the Gambit Prime game mode. Moving forward, an invasion kill will now heal 8% of a Primeval's health, down from 12%. So you're going to have to put in a little bit more work to ruin the enemy team's day. Additionally, the invasion portal cooldown time during the Primeval phase will be increased to 40 seconds up from 30 seconds, so there's not going to be quite as many invasions when you're trying to kill the envoy. And of course, this cooldown triggers after a player has been killed or successfully returns from an invasion. Finally, Gambit Prime will now count to unlock the weekly Gambit Clan engram. All quality of life changes that I think are greatly needed in Gambit Prime right now. I love the Gambit Prime game mode, but the final phase where you're burning down Primevals and whatnot was always a bit of a hassle, especially if you're solo queuing, because you always get that one guy who decides to kill the last Primeval envoy when he knows that there's an invasion coming. So I think in particular, adding an extra 10 seconds in between invasions there is definitely a great idea. But alright Guardians, that is pretty much it for some of the biggest bits of news contained in this week's issue of the Bungie Weekly blog, This Week at Bungie. In one quick last little note, I do appreciate that Cosmo, Deej, and Dylan all came forward this week to put one of the community's biggest fears to rest. There's been a lot of rumors about whether or not PvP is going to be a thing in Destiny moving forward. And in the TWAB, as well as on Twitter, and of course on the Bungie Bounty livestream earlier this week, all 3 of our community managers came forth to let us know, yes, Bungie is still going to be working on the Crucible in PvP moving forward. It's not going to be going away. And they reiterate that here at the end of the TWAB by basically saying that they have no plans to remove PvP from the Destiny franchise. They're still committed to working on that sandbox and putting out updates as frequently as they can. So if you're a Guardian out there who's been worried about the fate of the Crucible and Lord Shaxx in Destiny, well, looks like you've got nothing to worry about. But alright Guardians, that is it for this one. We went on for a while. There were some huge patch notes in there, and I'm really excited now for Arc Week. Some of those changes are great. And it makes me wonder if we're going to get a Void Week and a Solar Week for some of the other classes now. Either way, Update 2.2.1 is shaping up to be a pretty fun update. But alright Guardians, that is it for the news, and those are my thoughts. Be sure to leave me yours down in the comment section below. How do you feel about all of these changes? Are you psyched or relieved to hear that the Crucible isn't going anywhere? Be sure to leave me your thoughts. And if you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like, make sure you subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest stuff we're putting out. But alright, that's it for this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I am the Black Link. You Guardians, stay frosty.